Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special event at the for This Is Word Festival. We're very honoured and delighted to have with us for this event CJ Cooke, who I'll introduce more formally in a moment. This event is sponsored by the Word Festival's official sponsors, the Word Centre for Creative Writing, Aberdeen University, Aberdeen City Council, and is also and Creative Scotland. It's also co-hosted by the Aberdeen University Centre for the Novel. Today we'll be talking about, CJ and I will be discussing her last novel, The Lighthouse Witches, and if you're looking at the slide, what are the chances? There's a nice tie in there. CJ Cooke, also known as Carolyn Jess Cooke, grew up on a council estate in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, at the height of the Troubles, and she started writing at the age of 7 and pestered publishers for many years with manuscripts typed on her grandparents' old typewriter and cover notes written on pages ripped from school jotters. Since then, she's published 15 books in 23 languages and won numerous awards, including the Eric Gregory Award from the Society of Authors, a Tyrone Guthrie Prize, a Kay Blundell Award, and she's also won a Northern Writers Award 3 times. In 2011, her debut novel, The Guardian Angel's Journal, was published by Little Brown. The novel was an international bestseller, and her second novel, The Boy Who Could See Demons, published in 2012, is a cult classic. Her sixth novel, The Lighthouse Witches, was published in October 2021 and was an Indigo Book of the Month, an international bestseller, a New York Public Library Book of the Year, and was nominated for both an Edgar Award by Mystery Writers of America and an ITW Thriller Award in 2022. It is soon to be a major TV series produced by Studio Canal and the Picture Company. The Ghost Woods is her latest novel and is due to be published in October 2022. CJ holds a BA Honours and an MA, as well as a PhD from Queen's University Belfast, and she commenced her academic career in 2005 as a lecturer in film studies at the University of Sunderland. Shortly thereafter, she published 4 academic works in swift succession on Shakespearean cinema and film sequels before establishing her career as a poet, editor, and novelist. Now majoring in creative writing at the University of Glasgow, CJ convenes the prestigious MLIT Creative Writing there and researches ways that creative writing can help with trauma and mental health. Throughout 2013 to 18, she directed the Writing Motherhood Project, which explored the impact of motherhood on women's writing, and she's also the founder and director of the Stay at Home Literary Festival, which is dedicated to providing people with accessible, inclusive, and eco-friendly ways to access literature. You're all very welcome to this event, CJ. We're very pleased to have you here. If you could maybe begin this conversation and general discussion, which we'll open up to the audience later on, with perhaps a reading from the novel.
Yes, absolutely.
Great to start things off, to give you a flavour of what we'll be talking about.
I'm going to put this mic down and use this one. I'm hoping this works. Can you all hear me? Great stuff. Okay, well, thank you all for coming on Saturday night to hear me talk about this book. So this is The Lighthouse Witches, and I am going to read a scene that's actually set in Aberdeen. I thought that would be a nice touch. I don't know. So this, I need to tell you a wee bit, I think, in case you haven't read the novel. Prior to this scene, the character here is Luna, and she's an adult woman, and she has been told that her sister, who has been missing for 22 years, her sister has been found, her sister Clover, and she's travelling with her partner Ethan to the hospital in Aberdeen to see her, to be reunited. So I will... Yes, I'm going to start a little ways in. It's just after 6 p.m. when Ethan pulls into the hospital car park. They put on their masks. At the entrance, she sees a woman similarly masked, wearing a teal blue jumper, searching the car park as though she's waiting for someone. She must be Ailey. "Lovely to meet you, Luna," she says when they approach her. "Now, are you ready to meet your sister?" Luna is aware that Ailey is talking as she leads her through the corridors, but can't make out what she says. Her mind is turned to the carbolic smell of the corridor, the photographs of puffins on the hospital walls, an elderly man in a wheelchair with bloodied dressings across both eyes. She clutches the toy giraffe to her chest, her mouth running dry. It says on the form that you're next of kin, Ailey says, flipping through a paper file. Yes, Luna says, she's my sister. Clover mentioned that she was living with your mother when she went missing. Is that right? Our mother, Luna says. She went missing many years ago. It's clear to everyone that the words are difficult to say, even all these years later. Ethan squeezes her hand. This could be the moment, she thinks, the riddle of her childhood solved. She follows Ailey into a ward with walls covered in cartoon figures. A sign reads, Children's Ward. Are you sure it's this way? She hears Ethan ask. In a moment, she's in a side room, and she sees the figure on the bed, the chestnut shades in her hair lit up by a side lamp, hands folded in her lap, the lines of her face strikingly familiar. The delicate mouth, those denim blue, deep-set eyes, that wide, wise brow. Luna raises a hand to her mouth. She must sway a little in shock, for Ethan is quickly beside her, his arm around her waist. Hello, Clover, Ailey says brightly. Your sister Luna is here. The figure in the bed is a child of around 7 years. Her hair is scraped back from her face, the ends matted with dirt. She is pale and her lips are dry and chapped. There are dressings on her knees and arms from where she's been wounded. She is hooked up to an IV, and a handful of teddy bears have been tucked into the bed beside her for company. On the chart above her bed, someone has written Clover in black marker. Here we are, Ailey says, smiling. But Luna frowns at her, searching her face for explanation. Where is her sister? Who is this child? She's to stay at least one more night for observation, Ailey is saying, mistaking Luna's look for a query regarding the child's care. She has a concussion and is a bit dehydrated, and there's an injury on her hip that the doctors would like to speak with you about. Is she taking me to Mummy? The girl asks Ailey in a weak voice. I'm sure that's in the cards, Ailey tells her with a smile. Ethan gives a heavy sigh and rests his hand on Luna's shoulder. I'm sorry, he says under his breath. He begins to pull out his car keys because clearly they've driven all this way for nothing. They've come to collect a grown woman, but there's been a terrible mix-up, and here they are, presented with someone else's missing child. He turns to walk out, gesturing for Luna to follow, but she can't. She turns back towards the girl, staring. The child looks up, shyly taking in the sight of the woman in front of her. Luna lowers her mask to her chin, looking to Ailey for approval. How come you have my giraffe? The child asks, sitting straighter. You recognise it, Clover? Ailey says, encouraged by this exchange. It's Gianni, she says, itching to get him. Can I have him, please? Luna finds herself handing over the toy, dumbfounded as the child squeezes it to her cheek, exactly as Clover used to do. I missed you, Gianni. I've had him a long time, Luna finds herself saying, but Clover is already talking again, explaining that she set him down just the other day, and when she went to cuddle him in bed, he was gone. I put him right on the bedside table, didn't I, Gianni? And then I got dressed and he was gone. Ailey leans over to Clover and glances up at Luna. Do you recognise your sister, Luna? It's okay if you need a wee while. You're called Luna, the girl asks, narrowing her eyes. Luna nods. Well, isn't that lovely, Ailey says. Two sisters reunited. As soon as you're well, you'll be returning home with Luna. Luna opens her mouth to say something, but she is overwhelmed with a dozen emotions at once. The girl looks so like Clover, it's uncanny. Same pale, freckled face, same brown hair that curls at the bottom, and those round blue eyes fixed in the same intelligent, challenging stare, just like Clover's. She has the same nose as Luna, too, a little too wide, and her ears stick out. She's missing 2 front teeth, and her left cheek dimples slightly when she talks, just like Safi's. But she can't be Clover. She's more than 20 years too young. A nurse comes in then, keen to check Clover's drip. Luna can feel Ethan's eyes on her, expectant, the air between them filled with questions. She knows he wants her to leave, now that it's evident that this is all a mistake. But her heart is racing, her instincts shouting every bit as loud as her fear. Who is she, if not Clover?
Thank you so much for that. That's a fantastic reading, and really nice to have a flavour of what I think is, for me, one of the, as I was reading it, one of the highlights of the novel, which is that very warm relationship between the three sisters, particularly given the kind of discombobulating events that they find themselves in, and faced with all sorts of supernatural occurrences as well, which I suppose takes me to quite a pressing question that I had developed when I was reading the novel, which is what drew you to the subject of witchcraft and the history of witchcraft in Scotland in particular for the subject, or part of the subject for this novel?
So I am not previously from Scotland. I'm originally from Belfast, but we lived in England for a long time and then relocated to just outside Glasgow because I teach at the University of Glasgow. And when we moved, I discovered that we lived quite close to a site that was sort of dedicated, if you will, to a part of Scotland's witch trials. And I think just over the years, I've been teaching at Glasgow for 8 years now, and over the years I would hear about Scotland's witch trials, just very, very small kind of mentions, and I just remember being quite taken by this because I didn't know that there were witch trials in Scotland. I thought it was just sort of England, one part of England, and Salem in America. But as I sort of looked into this, and particularly the site that was near us in Paisley, which was where I think 7 or 8 people were executed on charges of witchcraft. And I remember one of the details that really sort of stayed with me was that 2 of the people who were executed were young boys, 2 brothers. I think one was 11. And that really struck me because at the time my son was 11. And I thought, you know, this is just so tragic and so sad. And then the more kind of details that I would sort of explore out of just interest. And I think I should say that I'm very interested in women's history, very interested in feminist history. And the witch trials were, were gendered. Predominantly women were executed. But as I sort of explored it and uncovered more detail, it just grew and grew and grew for me. It wasn't this tiny one event. It was so huge. And I just felt daunted that there was no... The information, it was just so silent. And when I would go to sites sometimes that I had researched online, there wouldn't be information at those sites. It was just so down low at key, or it was hidden, a hidden history. And I felt quite self-conscious actually, because although there's quite a lot of books on witches now, it's really having a moment. At the time, it seemed that witches were just a fantasy genre element, a trope, if you like. And I did wonder how my publisher was going to take it when I said, yeah, there's witches and time travel in this novel. I thought, are they going to imagine that? But that's where it sort of originally came from, that relocating and discovering that there was just a prevalence all over the place. Even Edinburgh Castle, it still astonishes me that there's just the witches' well. There's no kind of dedicated site with the names of 300 people who were killed there. So,
and that idea of the hidden history kind of resurfacing in the present is obviously quite a well known, I suppose, Gothic trope from 18th and 19th century fiction. And of course, the introduction of the element of time travel, which is one of the most sort of startling and gripping features of the Lighthouse Witches, really kind of foregrounds that kind of idea of the hidden history coming to the fore again. And I think, in particular, I noticed the dedication of the novel to the victims of the kind of the ruthless, misogynistic persecution of witches in Scotland, which, as you point out, is not something really that has been widely addressed, even by historians until fairly recently. And I wondered for you if the subject of Scottish witchcraft and the persecution of witches in Scotland resonated with any kind of contemporary feminist movements in recent years at all.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I was researching the Scottish witch trials, there was so much that I would uncover, and I felt like it could be talking to the moment, and that was very interesting for me. It was troubling and disturbing, but it just, I suppose, one of the things that I find myself as a writer returning to again and again, and sometimes really trying to avoid, because I feel like I'm just being boring, and no one wants to just repeat the same thing, but I keep finding myself being preoccupied by the relationship between the past and the present, and how that is a conversation and sometimes a very startling echo. But yeah, sometimes the things that I would research just felt like they could speak to the here and now. There was, some events that I was seeing. I think the Sarah Everard murder and the vigil that was held for her, and the sort of heavy police presence really struck me as a moment that just seemed to come straight from the pages of these very old history books from the 17th century. So yeah, certainly. But we sometimes, I do have this idea of the past as being within a certain time frame. The past is maybe in the last 100 years, and anything beyond that's like just so distant, it's archaic. But even though we're talking the 1600s, and the way we live is so different, it just seemed startling to me that we had a lot of similarities too.
Absolutely, and I think this is a novel which brilliantly kind of connects, a kind of hidden past, a hidden history with contemporary events, and how those might kind of have an impact on the present as well. It's not just a question of them being memorialized. And I think in part the novel does do that, because as you point out, a lot of the sites associated with the persecution of witches in Scotland are unmarked. But the sense in which a whole worldview is kind of impacted by our sort of knowledge of and awareness of these hidden histories. Yeah. And this novel really kind of brings all of that together very, very nicely. And the chronological disruption as well, I think, is kind of obviously very much a part of the way the novel does that very effectively. One of the other, and I know you've been asked about this quite a few times, CJ, in regards to this novel, one of the other aspects of how these hidden histories remain present in the present day is through their associations with landscape and setting. And I wondered if you could sort of say a bit about how you arrived at the particular settings for this novel. Certainly.
I think I was very interested in writing about an island to start with. I discovered that Scotland has, I believe, 900 islands. Obviously, many of them are small, they're uninhabited. But I still thought that was incredible. I had no idea. And it's amazing to sort of read about some of the cultures and traditions of these islands. The Isle of Egg, as far as I'm aware, the people who live in that island own that island, at least for the most part. I think there's a trust as well involved, but that sort of sense of community, I think, is just wonderful and super progressive. And I'm going to the Isle of Egg in January for no other reason than to write and to be in the Isle of Egg. But I also wanted that sense of remoteness in the novel, the remoteness that comes with living on an island. And, I think growing up in a small place, Northern Ireland, not a tiny island, but still small enough to give me a sense of what can happen, I think, with communities whenever they're maybe cut off and remote. It can lead to a certain type of thinking and so on. But even on a practical level, I did go to several islands to research this. I went to the Isle of Bute and spent time beside a lighthouse, actually, writing the book. I went to the Isle of Arran and got stranded. And that was really good, though, getting stranded, because it gave me a very healthy appreciation for the reality of island life. Because if, the ferries can't run, that's it. You're just stuck there. But yeah, I wanted to set it, though, on a fictional island, and Longhaven just was a name that came into my head, and I sort of Googled it in case it did exist, because that can happen, I think. You can think you've had this original idea, but no, it's not. You've just heard it, and it's like a, subliminal thing. So no, it didn't exist. I was originally going to set it on the Isle of Bute, because there were some witch trials there, and that's where Amy Hindman was executed. And I'd spent so much time there, but I thought, oh gosh, I live quite close to the Isle of Bute. People will not like me if I set this on the Isle of Bute and sort of infer that everyone on Bute is, the way these villages are. So I thought, no, best to make it fictional and have it off the Black Isle, which sounds great. It's just so brilliant as place names go. And so I wanted that mix of real place names, and I really worked hard to try and find places that, no one would have maybe heard of. Drumnadrochit, I thought, great name. I've got to put that in a novel. I would have used more like that if I'd been able to. So yeah, that was the plan, to make sure that we were, getting a wee tour of parts of Scotland that maybe don't get a look in. So.
No, it's certainly, I think the use of locations in particular, and the fact that these are fictional locations as well, the kind of atmosphere that you manage to create throughout the novel, using those kind of fictional locations, they're simultaneously kind of very, representative, I suppose, of the real places that you visited. But they're also remarkable because although they're fictional, they seem to, really convey a sense of the atmosphere of places that have associations with violence and persecution do have a kind of atmosphere and a kind of aura to them, whether it's Salem in Massachusetts or Pendle in Lancashire, particularly places associated with witch trials. I think the locations in the novel really kind of actually can convey a sense of kind of oppressiveness, the oppressiveness of the past, of this kind of past violence, which is kind of remarkable. And the kind of transformation of the lighthouse into a kind of Gothic kind of symbol as a result of that is quite remarkable as well.
Thank you.
I think, yeah.
Good.
well, I mean, on one level, I suppose one might think of lighthouses being kind of hopeful structures, beacons of light. But again, they're quite, in the novel, the spaces are used really nicely and kind of to emphasize the sense of claustrophobia, I think, and oppressiveness.
Well, I've lived in Whitley Bay for a long time, and we live beside St. Mary's Lighthouse, which is, the inspiration for the lighthouse, the longing. But I did think that it depended on the time of day or the sort of weather, that you would visit it in. If it was sunny, it could look beautiful and beacon of hope and all of those sort of symbolic things that a lighthouse is associated with. And other times it would be creepy. And I did a tour of St. Mary's Lighthouse, and it was just as I described in the novel, whereby the staircase was just attached very precariously to the inner wall. So if you sort of fell over the staircase or the banister, it was just a sheer drop. There was nothing going to break your fall, so it felt sort of dangerous. And all of that kind of, I think the upkeep of a lighthouse is difficult. So it really was all of that flaking paint and, the rusting window panes. And so depending on the light can be very, very scary indeed. Especially, I think, if you were locked inside it on a November evening.
Definitely, yeah. I certainly wouldn't want to be trapped in a lighthouse on a remote island. And I suppose there is also that kind of association with lighthouses and mystery and suspense, though, because of the story of the Flannan lighthouse keepers who famously went missing as well. So that was something kind of brought to mind as well by the representation of the lighthouse in the novel. I suppose one of the other kind of interesting features about the locations, and particularly the use of coastal locations in this novel, that sort of occurred to me as I was reading it, was that the idea of coastlines as being kind of changeable places, and that kind of tallied very much, I thought, with the kind of sense of chronological dislocation in the novel. But the sense in which coastlines in particular are subject to change, and of course we're writing in a time when we're thinking about climate change and rising sea levels as well. The idea that the sea might come back to reclaim the land in some ways seems to be quite a very prevalent idea in this novel. And that kind of seems to connect with a kind of an environmental awareness that's very much part of your use of location.
Yeah, I think this book, as well as the one that preceded it, The Nesting, and then the one that comes after, The Ghostwoods, which is published next month, I think they all have that environmental thread. I was really, I still am, just very frightened, I guess, by what we're not headlining, what's not being sort of, it seems to be very, down in terms of the news listings at the moment. And you sometimes, come across quite startling information that seems buried underneath everything else. But yeah, certainly for the nesting in particular, I went to the Arctic and did some research. And I was also writing a poetry collection on the climate emergency as well. But it's something that I just feel that I have to keep returning to, because I think it's on the coastlines that you can usually see the erosion quite literally and what effects it's having. So I took some time in the Lighthouse Witches to think about how much I wanted to go down that route, because I think a novel can only do so much, and if you start putting in too much, it just becomes, you don't centralize or give enough space to the things that you want your reader to experience. So I scaled it down, actually, to make sure I wasn't just shoehorning it in. But yeah, it's the idea that in the future things have changed because of climate change was important, because I think it's islands that will particularly see that damage. It was, at least when I went to Norway, it was the people living in those really tiny little fishing villages that were seeing the impact very dramatically. So, yeah.
And I think, as well as the kind of reclamation of the land by the sea, there are also frequent references to the reclamation of the land by nature through, albeit with some human assistance, through rewilding, which I know is something that is an interest of yours as well. Yeah,
rewilding was actually, I find it very hard to talk about how I get my ideas for my novels, because it always sounds so incoherent. It never sounds nice, and there's never a really solid story behind it. At least I don't think there is, like some other writers do. Well, one day I saw this thing and that led to me writing this novel. I just was really interested in ideas of rewilding and wildness, and that's where, this was originally called The Wildling, which, if you've read it, wildlings are the names of the creatures in the book. But I was just so interested in these different projects were happening. But, how on earth do you put that into a novel? Should it go into a novel? I don't know. I just was obsessed. And I suppose that's for me how novels start. I become obsessed with something really hard to explain to people. If I say to my friends or my husband, really obsessed with wilding and rewilding, it's like, oh, that's nice. Great. And what are you going to do with that? But it's something that I find very hard to explain, but I become, so for instance, with the Ghostwoods, I became obsessed with mushrooms. And that's going to be how I tell people how I wrote that story. I just became obsessed with mushrooms, still am, know a lot about fungi, could probably do a few lectures on that. So yes, I thought, that some of the work that I was seeing as well in the Highlands on rewilding needed a wee mention. And it just made sense as well on a practical level that, there would be that sort of sense of restoring parts of Scotland, and particularly the Caledonian forest, to the island. So,
yeah, it's just really fascinating to come across it in a novel which is about a relationship with the past and about what the future might hold.
Yeah.
But also the idea of turning back the clock and in natural terms. It's just really fascinating and it becomes a sort of vehicle for the other themes of the novel as well.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah,
That's good. I'm glad it worked out that way. I think sometimes the subconscious plays such a major role in your creativity that I think that's probably why I find it hard to, because I'm often not making conscious choices, and sometimes when I'm writing, it's really striking, even now, how threads will come together in a way that I didn't anticipate, because I actually now really plan my novels. I really, really, really plan them, because I've written so many that then took forever because I didn't plan. So I thought, right, I'm going to try and cut out a lot of that work by planning. If I can plan, then surely it'll all be fine. But sometimes, even though you plan, you find that you've actually laid the groundwork or seeded things that you weren't conscious of, and these connections can be made. So I love that. It's a little magic, I think, that still, I think that's it. It's hard to explain to people without sounding woo-woo, but it still reminds me that creativity is much more than just your conscious brain with my post-it notes that I lay out on the table with this is going to happen here and this is going to happen there, and sometimes it's actually the unconscious me that has sort of laid a trail of breadcrumbs without being conscious of it. So, yeah. Nice when that happens.
Yeah, it certainly does happen, and it really kind of, it's all these different connections I think that the reader makes throughout the novel are so unexpected, and that's one of the delights I think of it, is that there's always something kind of unexpected around the corner. Just from the very beginning, who'd have thought witches and lighthouses would have been a winning combination?
I know, right?
It really is.
Well, I was terrified. I mean, don't think that I thought, oh yes, of course this is going to work. I spent a good year hating this novel, being scared to mention it to my publisher. By the way, did you know that there's going to be time travel halfway through? Oh, and there's witches. I really thought that they were going to just be like, what the hell are you doing? There's too much, So I was really pleased that A, I held my nerve, and B, that they liked it. At first I thought they were just being kind, but no, they genuinely did. But I did spend a year hating this novel, genuinely hating it. So it's actually been a really big learning curve writing this book, because I think I would have quit if I was, not in this stage of my career. The sort of younger me would probably not have had the nerve to keep going, even though I just felt this is not working, it's not coming together. Because I was a bit more experienced, I just kept going with it. But I think younger me, baby writer me, would have said, no, just put that aside. It's not going to work. So.
And has writing the Ghostwoods turned out to be a different experience for you, or?
There was less hate this time. There was less hate, but there was still hate, just not as much. I swore after the Lighthouse Witches I was not going to write something as ambitious and complicated, because I really hated myself for a long time for taking on so many different bits and pieces. The Ghostwoods was a better process, but yeah, I think hating your novel, I now realise that's when it's nearly finished. If you start hating it, then actually it's a good sign, because you're nearly done. So you have to get to deep abject loathing before you can submit it, and then you're finished.
I mean, it's, as I say, it's all come together very nicely in the Lighthouse Witches, and
Great.
I'm really looking forward to actually catching up with the Ghostwoods when it comes out next month. So really, really interesting to hear how the two experiences of writing these novels compare to one another.
Yes, key word is hatred. Just make sure you hate your work, and then sorted.
But if we may, at this juncture, perhaps have another reading, and then we will open the floor to questions and further discussion. Mm-hmm. I think if you'd like to treat us to another extract, please, CJ. I'll just grab the microphone.
Okay, so this is The Ghostwoods, and it comes out on the 13th of October. This is the one where I got obsessed with mushrooms. It's going to be the tagline. No, I'm only joking. I really should try and come up with a better pitch. I'll give you the sort of rundown of the plot. It's set in Scotland again, on the Scottish borders, although there's some of it takes place in Dundee. And it's set in 1959 and 1965. And I got really interested in mother and baby homes. So we've all, I'm sure, heard of the Magdalen laundries in Ireland and the atrocities that happened there, but I didn't sort of realise that mother and baby homes were just a thing in the whole of the UK and the US, that in the 1960s and 1950s and 1970s, actually. So I was born in 1978, and I had some questions about some things that happened around the time that I was born. And it was only when I learned of sort of historical events, I thought, well, that makes sense why my mum gave up her job, for instance, to have me. Because previous to that in Ireland, I can't remember the year, but I think it was about 5 years, 1973, it was still illegal for married women to work, things like that. Anyway, so when I was looking at the mother and baby homes, I was looking at the social context for a woman. And how bad it was, and I was really just thinking about, that period of women's history. So the story is concerning a residential mother and baby home, which is it's called Lichen Hall. It's a big old manor house that's opened by the family to women or girls, such as Mabel. She's 17 and pregnant, and she arrives there to have her baby. And she meets another woman in 1965 called Pearl. And Mabel's little boy, Sylvan, has a very special gift. And it's about the three of them trying to escape Lichen Hall, which has its own dark history. So this is Mabel, Dundee, May 1959. I have a ghost in my knee. There's a small pocket just behind the kneecap, and she's hiding in there, all tucked up in the soft mattress of cartilage. She's very small and terrified, so I'm sitting with that leg slightly straightened so I don't disturb her. I've not said a word about this to anyone. They'd think I'd gone mad. Mabel, are you listening? Ma's eyes are wide as if she's trying to wake herself up, but her hands tell a different story. She's holding on to the strap of her handbag, knuckles white, as though we're on a fairground ride. Did you hear what Dr. McCann just said? I nod, but I didn't hear, not really. I'm always doing this, sliding off into a daydream. I look over the file on the desk beside us. I can see my name, Mabel Ann Haggith, date of birth, 12th of March, 1942, 98 pounds, 5'2". Dr. McCann peers down his spectacles, his fat red fingers laced together like a sea creature. The air in the room pulses with the sense that I've done something wrong. When was the date of your last menstrual period, Miss Haggith, he says. I'm not sure. Embarrassment hits me like a slap. Nobody has ever asked me that before. It's a private thing. Do try and recall, he says wearily. Ma nudges me as though I'm being rude. My monthlies have always been irregular, I stammer. I only need to know about one menses, Miss Haggith, Mr. McCann sighs. The last one. Just before Christmas, I say, remembering how the ground seemed to tilt that morning in the bakery when I was putting in the first batch of mince pies. A strong twist in my groin, and I knew what was happening, unlike now. Dr. McCann scribbles something down before flipping through the calendar on his desk. More scribbling and muttering. The ghost in my knee gives a cough. 5 months, Dr. McCann announces, which suggests a due date of the end of September. He plucks a leaflet from a pile on his desk. Here, he says, passing it to Ma. I expect you'll wish to make inquiries as soon as you can. Ma takes the leaflet with a sob. The ghost is restless, unable to sleep now. I rub my kneecap furiously until Ma pulls my hand away. Who was it? She snaps, her eyes flashing. Was it that awful boy, Jack? Jack, I say, frowning. I don't understand. What's wrong with me? Am I dying? Dying, Dr. McCann says. Come on, Mabel, you're 17, you're not a child. I would have thought you'd keep your legs crossed, Ma hisses, angry tears wobbling in her eyes. And that dirty, disgusting boy. I knew it would come to this. It's only when I see the title of the leaflet that it dawns on me, a slow realization like creeping fingers along my neck. St. Luke's Mother and Baby Home. The front of the leaflet bears a picture of a woman sitting in bed, a man and woman beside her. They're all smiling, and she's handing a baby to them. A subheading reads, "Adoption is the best option for unwed mothers." They think I'm having a baby. That's what this is. I'm not having a baby, I protest loudly. And I almost go to tell them about the ghosts that sometimes sleep in my lungs or hide in my gums, and that maybe there's a ghost in my womb and they've mistaken it for a baby. But instead I say, I'm a virgin, which causes Dr. McCann to splutter into a laugh. He looks at Ma, whose face is tight, lips pursed. A fact I once heard drifts into my head. The average person tells 1 or 2 lies a day, but is lied to up to 200 times a day. I know I've told the truth, so is Dr. McCann lying? My stepdad Richard is waiting for us in the car when we go outside. Everything okay? He asks Ma, and she presses her face into his chest as though we've fled a war. He looks at me. What did you do? He says. I keep my knees straight for the ghost, but she's moved. I feel her in my tummy now, dancing. It's that Jack, Ma whispers, stricken. He's got Mabel in trouble. Jack's my friend from 2 doors down. We've been seeing each other, but never gone further than kissing. It's not Jack, I say, afraid that she's going to pin blame on him when he's innocent. Mother of God, she hisses, crossing herself. There's a squadron of potential fathers. Richard stares at me, his face darkening. I don't know what I've done wrong. We pull off for home. Our house is a 4-story terrace in Rotten Row. There are 9 bedrooms, 7 of which are usually occupied by strangers. We've lived there all my life, but it's only been a guest house since Dad died 10 years ago. It's how Ma met Richard. He came to stay 6 years ago and never left. We stop outside Mr. McGregor's butcher's shop. Richard winds down the window and the smell wafting from the shop door is like an open crypt. I scramble for the door handle, certain I'm about to be sick. Adoption is the best option for unwed mothers. You can go for the mince, Mabel, Ma says, handing me some coins. £1/4 pound and not half an ounce more, do you hear? On you go. I press the lapel of my coat to my nose and walk into the butcher's. An inch of sawdust carpets the floor. Plucked chickens are strung up by their necks, and a row of dead pigs hang upside down along the back wall. Mr. McGregor's son Rory is working today. He's a little older than me and deaf. When Rory's working, they use a notepad and a pencil for the customers to write down what they want. Sometimes Rory writes back little messages like, "Nice day for a barbecue," or "You're looking well today, Mrs. Haggith." What was I to order again? A dead chicken? When I reach the top of the queue, Rory has been replaced by an older man I've never seen before. He must work for Mr. McGregor because he's wearing a blood-stained striped apron, and he's wiping his hands in a towel. He has a tattoo on the side of his face, a spider's web. "What'll it be?" he says. "Got a great deal on pork sausages today, £1 for 10 pence. I pick up the notepad and pencil. I take a fresh page on the notepad and write, but the words don't make sense. They say, "There's a man in the car with a knife to my ma's neck. He'll kill her if you don't give me everything in the till." I hand the note to the man with the spider's web tattoo. He looks up at me with a look of wild confusion, and suddenly I'm relieved because he's every bit as green about the gills as I feel after what happened in Dr. McCann's office. Why did I write that? One of the ghosts must have written it. I can feel one of them lengthening along the bone of my index finger, fidgeting. The shop is empty. The man glances again at Richard's car parked outside, and whatever he sees must convince him because he makes a quick dash for the till and starts stuffing handfuls of money into a plastic bag. He hands it to me with a grim nod, the bag full of coins and notes swinging in the foul stench of dead things. I find my arm lifting, my fingers unfolding from my palm, the bag jangling in my hand, my feet turning and cutting a fresh path through the sawdust. And then I'm outside and I get into the car and hold on to the bag of money. I'm not sure what's going on. "Pass me the mince," Ma says, snapping her fingers, "and the receipt. He better not have overcharged you. Always adding on a few more ounces than I asked for, that McGregor." I hand her the bag. She opens it and stares down at the cash. There's a moment of complete silence when all the ghosts inside me are still and Ma's too bewildered to say anything at all. But it doesn't last. She turns sharply and stares at me in alarm. "Mabel," she says.
Thank you so much for that. That was another fantastic reading. We're doubly spoiled tonight. We now have the opportunity for some questions and a bit more discussion. I think there is a roving microphone roving around the room as we speak.
Hi. I was just excited when you said about Paisley, because I was born and brought up in Paisley, and I wanted to know if the place you were talking about was Maxwellston Cross, because when I was a child, we used to drive into town to go shopping, and Mum would always say, when you turned right at the traffic lights, don't go over the Heart.
Yeah.
Because that's where the witches were burned, and I think she was.
That's right. Yeah,
unlucky to drive over the Heart cobblestone.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I think it's the particular witch trial that it refers to is the Baroccan trials, I believe. I hope I haven't got that wrong, but yes, that's the name of the site. Yeah, 20 minutes from us, and actually the two wee boys were from an estate 5 minutes, I think, from us in the opposite direction. So just suddenly to be in such close proximity, I'm impressed that there is, a memorial there, because some of the other places I went to, there's nothing. There's just nothing at all. So yes, but that's the one in Paisley.
Thank you. I was kind of struck when you were saying, I was struck by what you were saying earlier about these sites where you have a sense of past violences or past tragedies being suddenly very present. And it seemed to me like that was just a fairly good description of what it is to be from the place where we are both from. So I wanted to ask about, maybe if you could speak a little about how Belfast has structured your, like, even though you've been out of Belfast for a long time, how it has structured your writing or how it continues to structure your writing.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. Yeah, I think Belfast is always in my writing. I grew up in I think most of Belfast was troubled, but I have to say, when I was younger and I would go to parts of Belfast that were sort of beautiful and affluent, and they didn't seem to be from the same world that I was from. It was always very striking how it just taught me that there's a city within the city, or cities within a city. But I think, having grown up in Belfast and really witnessing such, riots and being on a street that was, very much part of that, I think that has stayed with me very, very much. And I find it difficult to go back because I just remember that so vividly. So even though over the years, because I've lived away now for 18 years, but I moved away when I was 21. I moved to Sydney for a bit. But every time I would go back, it would look prettier, and there would be, really fabulous cafes that just did not exist when I was growing up, and just beautiful new buildings, and it really looks, the ticket. But I still just see and remember so vividly the things that happened when I was younger that I just can't see it. I see it through the lens of my childhood. So yeah, I think I'm seeing a sort of palimpsest. I'm seeing the city behind the gloss, and I'm carrying all those memories. So I'm very sensitive to how we can read place. And it can work both ways, I think, because you can find a place that just feels like home, and it's sort of just your place, and it has really nothing maybe to do with how beautiful it is just is right for you. But conversely, I think, we can have places that maybe have a lingering presence in a way. And that's my relationship to Belfast is therefore very troubled. I admire and respect people who can talk about home and their homeland and where they're from, because I don't have that in the same way that, it's the place that you were born. So, I know that sounds very tragic. Sorry, it's not really.
I was really struck by, thank you so much for both your readings, the way that you're combining quite a realistic register with magic. And
Yes.
I wondered if there were any particular authors that had inspired that kind of register for you. Is that the way you've always kind of written, or has that been something you've developed?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I think it's always been, I think I had a very, very religious upbringing. And I think Hilary Mantel was saying this, or I'd read somewhere that she said this recently, that one of the best things for a writer is a religious upbringing. And it made me stop and think, well, that's okay. That's a new way of looking at things. Because, I think having a religious upbringing really makes you see the world in a particular way. That there's a very thin line between this world and another world. And that's, I think, what I grew up with. But I loved Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I mean, it's deeply bleak, but I just really got on board with what I felt he was trying to do. He was writing about parenthood, but in a very apocalyptic way. So, but that completely chimed with me. It's not a magic novel, but there's a kind of paranormality or an otherworldliness, I think, that he brings into something that's very real and with the here and now. So, yeah, and I always lean towards those authors who were able to kind of press into the margins of existence and explore that sort of marginality and push that marginality a bit further.
So you talk about religious upbringing. Do you have any religious upbringing?
Yes, I had a deeply religious upbringing, but I'm not religious now. So, but it really, I think, did shape me in that respect and helping me, or appreciate that there's more to what we see, and the whole concept of faith is very much about believing in something that there is no evidence for, and actually can be very ludicrous. But you have faith, and I think it also trains you to narrativize, because suddenly you're building evidence based on, you're creating your own evidence because you're linking events together and creating a narrative for that. Does that answer your question? Sorry, go ahead. Do you want to ask it again? Oh, okay. I'll not. I don't think I should say, because I don't want to disparage anyone's religious faith. But yeah.
Given what you were saying about the parallels you could see between your interest in witches as you were writing and contemporary feminist issues, I wonder if you have any thoughts on the recent pardoning of witches by the Scottish Government, and whether you think that's going to help reshape the discourse around contemporary women's experience in any kind of way, or is it just a pardoning of a historical event that puts down a particular marker?
Oh, I love Witches of Scotland, and I was actually finishing off this book when I discovered their podcast, and they'd only done about 6 then, but I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And a friend of mine, Zoe, was behind it, so it was just amazing and so timely. But yeah, I am 100% for that movement and the pardon. It's not, well, it's a pardon of sorts, but it's the recognition, isn't it, of these atrocities, and I think it really brings into the present the discourse around witches. We still use that term, and this is one of the things that really struck me, because we're looking back into the 1600s and the 1500s, but we're still using the term witch in almost everyday parlance to denigrate women. It's always at women, and yet witches was at the beginning was it was non-gender specific, but of course James VI made it very clear it's only women who are more susceptible to the devil, etc. So it became more and more gendered. Although it wasn't just a sort of, well, I won't go into all that, but there was more than gender to it at the time. But still, the fact that it has definitely become a gendered issue, I think it's really important that we have this movement and this pardon, because also there are parts of the world where witchcraft is still believed in and people are killed because, so it's sort of unfathomable in a modern context for us, because we think, well, that was in the early modern period, but no, in some parts of the world it's still current. And if we can set a precedent, then it hopefully will impact that. But I think it will also contribute, I hope, to gender equality and discussions of women's rights. So that's my hope. I think just having teenage daughters as well just makes you think a wee bit about the way the society's going. And sometimes it's not. You just think, I don't think it's changed very much, or as much as I would have liked. So I hope that movement contributes.
Okay, well, if we have no further questions, I'd just like to thank CJ for a fantastic discussion and some really excellent insights into your both books, The Lighthouse Witches and The Ghost Woods, coming out next month. The Lighthouse Witches, and I believe some of CJ's other books, are available to purchase from the Blackwell's stand over in the corner. But I'd also just like to thank Lesley Crerar, our fantastic BSL interpreter, for her work this evening, and all of you for coming as well, and the AV team for the Word Festival, and the Word Festival organisers, of course, as well, for all their fantastic hard work throughout the whole festival. So once again, thank you to CJ, and thank you to all of you. A round of applause.